Chapter 11. After dinner, Elizabeth ran up to her sister's room, prepared her warm clothes, and brought her out to the drawing room. The two host ladies welcomed them with expressions of pleasure. For the hour before the gentlemen appeared, Elizabeth found them more agreeable than she had ever seen. Their conversational skills were excellent. They could accurately describe a party, recount a humorous anecdote, and laugh freely with their friends. But once the gentlemen entered, Jane was no longer their primary concern. Miss Bingley's eyes immediately turned to Darcy. She spoke a few words to him before he reached them. He greeted Jane with warm wishes for her health. Mr. Hurst also bowed slightly and said he was very glad, but only Bingley was genuinely warm and attentive. He expressed both joy and concern for her. For half an hour, they stirred the fire and kept it burning brightly for fear that Jane might feel chilled. Bingley suggested she sit by the fireplace, then seated himself near her, scarcely speaking to anyone else. Elizabeth sat on the opposite side of the room, her heart full of happiness as she observed the scene. When tea was finished, Mr. Hurst reminded his sister of the card table, but no one showed any interest. Miss Bingley, who suspected Darcy did not like cards, refused on the pretext that no one wanted to play. Their silence seemed to confirm her claim. With nothing to do, Mr. Hurst stretched himself on a sofa and fell asleep. Darcy took up a book to read, Miss Bingley followed his example, and Mrs. Hurst busied herself with her bracelets and rings, occasionally making conversation with Jane. Miss Bingley alternated between pretending to read, commenting on Darcy's book, or trying to look over its pages. Yet she could not draw him into conversation. He answered only briefly and returned to his reading. At last, finding no pleasure in her own book chosen only because it was the next volume to the one he was reading, she yawned and exclaimed, "What a delightful evening we are having, I declare. There is nothing so enjoyable as reading. One may grow tired of anything else, but not of a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I do not have an excellent library." No one responded. She yawned again, tossed the book aside, and looked round the room in search of something more diverting. When she heard her brother mention a ball for Jane's sake, she turned to him. "Charles, do you really intend to give a ball at Netherfield? Before you proceed, I advise you to consult the wishes of the neighborhood. I may be mistaken, but I suspect certain people among us consider a ball to be a punishment rather than a pleasure. If you mean Darcy, he may go to bed before it begins, if he chooses. The ball is decided. I should prefer a different sort of gathering. There is always something intolerably tedious about these large events. Conversation is much preferable to dancing." "My dear Caroline, you may say so, but it would not be a ball then." Miss Bingley did not reply. After a moment, she stood and began walking about the room. Her figure was elegant, her carriage graceful, all clearly intended for Darcy's attention, but he remained absorbed in his book. In desperation, she attempted another tactic. Turning to Elizabeth, she said, "Miss Lizzie, I wish to persuade you to walk about the room with me. I assure you it is very refreshing after sitting so long." Elizabeth was surprised, but agreed. Miss Bingley had achieved her purpose. Darcy looked up. Like Elizabeth, he quickly realized he was being drawn into the scheme. They invited him to join them, but he refused. He said he believed there were only two reasons for ladies to walk about a room together, and that if he joined them, he would interfere with one of those reasons. "What can you possibly mean?" Miss Bingley cried, eager to know his thoughts. She asked Elizabeth if she understood him. Elizabeth replied, "I do not have the smallest idea. But since he means to be severe on us, the best way to disappoint him is to ask no questions." Miss Bingley, however, refused to disappoint Darcy in anything and insisted that he explain his two motives. "If you insist," said he, "either you walk to enjoy each other's company and speak confidentially, which I would not intrude upon, or you walk because you know your figures show to the greatest advantage in motion. In that case, I can admire you better from my seat by the fire." "Shocking! I never heard anything so absurd." "How shall we punish you for such a speech?" Miss Bingley exclaimed. "It is not easy to punish me if you merely intend to vex me. Anyone may do that." "You should tease him, laugh at him, you, who know him so well," Elizabeth suggested. "Upon my honor, I do not know him at all. Believe me, my intimacy with him has not taught me how to do such things. Tease his composure and intelligence, no, indeed. As for laughing at him, one must not laugh without proper occasion. Mr. Darcy may take it as a compliment to himself. Elizabeth said, "To be sure, Mr. Darcy is not to be laughed at. That is a rare privilege, and I hope it remains rare, for I should be greatly at a disadvantage if everyone I knew was as difficult to laugh at." "I dearly love a laugh," Darcy said. "Miss Bingley has given me more credit than I deserve. The wisest and best actions of men indeed, the wisest and best actions of mankind may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke." Elizabeth replied, "True enough, there are people like that. But I hope I am not one of them. I hope I do not make jokes too often. Folly, nonsense, whim, and inconsistency delight me, I confess, and I laugh at them whenever I can. But I believe you are safe from me." "No one can be safe," Darcy answered. "But I have learned to avoid those weaknesses which often expose a person to ridicule. Such weaknesses as vanity and pride." "Yes, vanity is indeed a weakness. But pride, where there is real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation." Elizabeth turned away to hide a smile. Miss Bingley interjected. "I think you have studied Mr. Darcy long enough. Tell us your result." "According to what he has said, I am perfectly convinced he has no defects." "He has admitted them openly," Darcy objected. "I did not mean to boast. I have many faults, but I hope they are not of understanding. As for my temper, I cannot vouch for it. I am not of a forgiving disposition. I cannot easily forget the follies and offenses of others. My feelings are not easily moved. In short, I am resentful. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever." "That is indeed a failing," said Elizabeth. "Resentment which no effort can overcome is a serious defect. But at least you have chosen your fault wisely. I cannot tease you for it. You are safe with me. I believe everyone has some natural defect which even the best education cannot remove. And yours is to dislike everybody, and yours is to willfully misunderstand them." Tired of a conversation in which she could take no share, Miss Bingley cried, "Let us have some music, Louisa. Pray, wake Mr. Hurst." Her sister did not object. The piano was opened once more, and Darcy, after a few moments of reflection, began to regret it. He suddenly felt the danger of having allowed himself to become too interested in Elizabeth. Chapter 12. After the two sisters had agreed with each other, Elizabeth wrote home to ask her mother to send the carriage to bring them back. But Mrs. Bennet had already decided that Jane should remain at Netherfield until Tuesday, exactly 1 week after she had fallen ill, so she was displeased by this request. Her reply did not at all match Elizabeth's wishes. Mrs. Bennet said that she could not possibly send the carriage before Tuesday, adding that if Mr. Bingley or his sisters insisted, the girls might stay even longer. Elizabeth, however, was determined not to prolong their stay and had no desire to be pressed by their hosts. On the contrary, she feared they might think she had intruded upon their household long enough. She therefore urged Jane to request the use of Mrs. Hurst's carriage. At last, the sisters informed their hosts of their intention to leave Netherfield that morning and asked to borrow the carriage. Everyone expressed a wish that they remain one more day, that Jane might rest further. The sisters agreed, and Miss Bingley immediately regretted having suggested the delay, for her jealousy of Elizabeth far outweighed any concern she felt for Jane. Mr. Bingley was genuinely distressed at the thought of their leaving too soon. He repeatedly urged Miss Bingley that it was unsafe for Jane, that she was not fully recovered. But Jane was firm, convinced that she was well enough. To Darcy, the news was quite welcome. Elizabeth had stayed far too long. She had fascinated him more than he liked, and Miss Bingley had shown increasing rudeness toward her and teased him more than usual. He wisely resolved that he must give no further sign of admiration, nothing that might give her reason to hope she could influence his happiness. Knowing that his intentions might become noticeable, he felt his behavior on their last day would either confirm or dispel suspicion. Determined to pursue this plan, he spoke only a few words to her throughout Saturday. Even when they were alone for half an hour, he kept his eyes on his book and did not look at her. On Sunday, they parted, almost all with a sense of relief. Miss Bingley behaved politely toward Elizabeth and affectionately toward Jane. She expressed a wish to see Jane again, either at Longbourn or Netherfield, then embraced her gently and shook Elizabeth's hand. Elizabeth felt more cheerful than any of them. Mrs. Bennet's welcome, however, was far from warm. She fretted at seeing them return, convinced they had made a grave mistake in coming home and certain that the journey would make Jane fall ill again. Mr. Bennet, on the other hand, though he spoke only a few brief words of pleasure, was truly delighted to have them back. He felt their presence mattered greatly to the family. Without them, dinner conversations had been dull and almost lifeless. They found Mary, as usual, absorbed in her study of human nature, ready with several stale moral reflections for everyone to hear. Catherine and Lydia, meanwhile, had news of a different sort. Since the previous Wednesday, much had happened with the regiment. Several officers had dined with their uncle, one private had been punished, and there were rumors that Colonel Foster was to be married. Chapter 13. While the whole family was at breakfast, Mr. Bennet said to his wife, "I hope, my dear, that you will prepare a good dinner today, for we are to have a guest." "What do you mean?" "I haven't heard of anyone coming, except perhaps Charlotte Lucas dropping in unexpectedly. But I trust our family fare is good enough for her. I hardly think she's used to anything better at home." "It is a gentleman, my dear." Mrs. Bennet's eyes brightened. "A gentleman? You must mean Mr. Bingley. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jane, you are always so sly." "I shall be absolutely delighted to see him again. Oh, but what a misfortune! We have not a single fish in the house." "Lydia, ring the bell." "I must speak to Hill at once," Mr. Bennet replied. "It is not Mr. Bingley. It is a gentleman I have never seen in my life." This produced a universal astonishment, and he enjoyed the suspense as his wife and daughters pressed him with questions. After amusing himself a while with their curiosity, he calmly explained, "About a month ago, I received this letter. I answered it 2 weeks later. As the matter was rather delicate, I wanted to handle it carefully from the beginning. It is from Mr. Collins, the man who may, if he chooses, turn us all out of this house when I am dead." Mrs. Bennet cried out in horror. "Oh, I cannot bear to hear of that man. Do not speak of him again. It is the most unjust thing in the world that your property should be entailed away from your own children, and if I were you, I would have taken steps long ago." Jane and Elizabeth tried to explain once more the nature of an entail. They had attempted it many times, but the subject was forever beyond her comprehension. She continued to rail against the cruelty of depriving a family of 5 daughters of their home in favor of a man nobody cared about. Mr. Bennet said, "It is indeed a vexing affair, and nothing can justify Mr. Collins's inheriting Longbourn. But if you would listen to his letter, you might find some relief in his tone." "No, I shall find no relief at all. He must be an impudent, hypocritical man to write to you. I detest such falsehood. Why does he not continue the quarrel like his father before him?" "Well, perhaps because he feels some scruples about family harmony, as you will hear." Hunsford, Westerham, Kent, October 15th. Dear Sir, the long-standing disagreement between you and my late respected father has always troubled me, and since his unfortunate death, I have earnestly desired to heal the breach. For a time, however, I felt it improper to offer reconciliation to anyone with whom he had been at variance. But now, having received holy orders at Easter last, and having additionally been honored through the generosity and condescension of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, widow of the late Sir Louis de Bourgh, with the rectory of this parish, I feel it my duty as a clergyman to promote peace and goodwill within the sphere of my influence. On these grounds, I consider it right to extend the olive branch, and as the heir to the Longbourn estate and inheritance, which I hope will be forgiven me, I trust you will not reject my overture. I cannot be easy until I have apologized for any pain the entail may cause your amiable daughters, and I request permission to offer them my sincere respects, though I shall speak more on this later. If you do not object to receiving me, I shall do myself the honor of waiting upon your family on Monday, November 10th, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I intend to remain until the following Saturday, and shall bring no inconvenience to my parish, as Lady Catherine is pleased to permit my absence on Sunday, provided another clergyman conducts the services. With respectful compliments to Mrs. Bennet and your daughters, I remain, dear Sir, your well-wisher, William Collins. Mr. Bennet folded the letter and said, "So at 4 o'clock we shall welcome this messenger of peace. He seems a conscientious and polite young man. I foresee a promising acquaintance, especially if his patroness allows him to visit again." "There seems to be some meaning in what he says about the girls," said Mrs. Bennet, "and if he intends to make amends, I shall not oppose it." Jane added, though it is hard to guess what form his compensation may take, he deserves credit for expressing his intention. Elizabeth was particularly struck by his excessive reverence for Lady Catherine and by the pompous way he spoke of christenings, marriages, and funerals. She said, "He seems very odd. I cannot make him out. There is something pompous about him. And what does he mean by apologizing for being the heir? It is not as if he can help it." "Do you think he is a sensible man, Papa?" "I think not. I am most eager to meet a man who contradicts all my expectations. His letter is both humble and self-important, which tells me a great deal. I look forward to seeing him." Mary remarked, "As to style, the letter is perfect. The reference to the olive branch is hardly original, yet I consider it well expressed." To Lydia and Kitty, the letter and the writer were of no interest whatsoever. A cousin who did not wear a red coat could not possibly matter, and it had already been weeks since they cared for any coat of another color. Mrs. Bennet, however, was somewhat pacified by the letter and prepared to meet him with a composure quite astonishing to her husband and daughters. Mr. Collins arrived punctually and was received with proper civility. Mr. Bennet said little, but the young ladies were ready enough to converse. And Mr. Collins needed neither encouragement to speak nor restraint to keep silent. He was a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25, extremely formal in manner, and grave in his deportment. He soon complimented Mrs. Bennet on her delightful family of 5 daughters, saying he had heard much of their beauty but found the reality far surpassed the report. He added that he doubted not they would all be happily settled in life before long. Some of the girls felt little pleasure in such flattery, but Mrs. Bennet, who preferred praise to argument, answered at once, "You are very kind, sir, and I sincerely hope your words come true. Otherwise, their situation will be very hard indeed. Life is full of strange turns. You allude, perhaps, to the entail." "Yes, that is what troubles me, but I do not blame you. It is all chance. No one can control to whom an estate falls when it is entailed. I assure you, madam, I feel deeply for my fair cousins, and I should say much more on the subject were I not fearful of expressing myself too warmly. But you may rely on my sincere concern for their welfare. I cannot say more at present, but when we are better acquainted." He was interrupted by the announcement of dinner, and the girls exchanged smiles. Mr. Collins was not only devoted to the ladies, he admired everything. He praised the size of the hall, the dining room, and each piece of furniture. His approval might have delighted Mrs. Bennet, had she not been tormented by the notion that he viewed everything as his future property. He complimented the dinner exceedingly and asked which of the young ladies had the talent for such excellent cookery. Mrs. Bennet impatiently corrected him rather rudely, saying they kept a cook and that her daughters had nothing to do with the kitchen. He apologized profusely for offending her. She assured him she was not in the least offended. Yet he continued apologizing for some time. Chapter 14. Mr. Bennet said very little during dinner, but once the servants had withdrawn from the dining room, he decided it was time to talk with their guest. He opened the conversation with the subject he believed most important to his cousin, remarking that Mr. Collins had been very fortunate to receive the patronage of his ladyship, and that Lady Catherine de Bourgh's attention to his professional duties as well as her consideration for his comfort were quite extraordinary. Mr. Bennet could not have chosen a topic more pleasing to his cousin, for Mr. Collins launched into an enthusiastic eulogy of his patroness. The subject elevated his habitual solemnity to something even more imposing, and with his most dignified air he declared he had never seen such affability and condescension in any noblewoman as he had observed in Lady Catherine. She had graciously condescended to approve of his sermons during her attendance at church. She had twice invited him to dine at Rosings, and only the previous Saturday had asked him to fill a place at the quadrille table in the evening. Many people he knew had insisted that Lady Catherine was extraordinarily proud, but he had never witnessed anything but affability from her. She conversed with him as she would with any other gentleman, never discouraged his visiting among neighboring families, and offered no objection when he left the parish to visit his relatives. She had even advised him to marry as soon as he could find a suitable partner, providing he made his choice with care. She had visited his modest parsonage several times, and had been perfectly satisfied with his arrangements, though she had suggested very kindly adding a few shelves in the upstairs closet. Mrs. Bennet said, "That is all quite proper and polite. I am sure she must be a very agreeable woman. It is a pity such ladies are not more common. Does she live near you? My humble abode is separated from Rosings Park only by a narrow lane. And she is a widow, I think. Has she any family? She has one daughter, her sole heiress, who will inherit Rosings along with its immense fortune. Mrs. Bennet cried out, shaking her head. Ah, so she is a wealthy young lady. And what is she like? Is she handsome? She is, indeed, the most charming young woman I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. Lady Catherine herself has often told me that in true elegance she surpasses the handsomest of her sex, for she displays all the appearance of a young woman of rank. Unfortunately, her delicate health has prevented her from attaining excellence in many accomplishments. Otherwise, she could not fail in anything she attempted. Attaining excellence in many accomplishments. Otherwise, she could not fail in anything she attempted. But she is most amiable, and often condescends to drive by my humble parsonage. Has she been presented at court? I cannot recall seeing her name among the ladies presented. Her health prevents her from going to town, which I mentioned only the other day to Lady Catherine. I told her it was truly unfortunate, for such beauty would be an ornament to the court. She seemed much pleased by my remark, and you may imagine how delighted I am whenever an opportunity arises to offer any delicate compliment women of all ranks appreciate. More than once I have ventured to observe to Lady Catherine that her lovely daughter was born to be a duchess, and that the exalted rank would receive additional grace from her rather than confer distinction upon her. Such little attentions please her ladyship, and are, I believe, due on my part in return for her kindness toward me. Mr. Bennet said, "You are indeed right. You have mastered the art of pleasing others by means of delicate attentions. May I ask whether these compliments occur naturally or whether you prepare them beforehand? For the most part, they arise spontaneously. However, I do occasionally arrange a compliment suited to particular circumstances, though I always strive to deliver it as if it were entirely unpremeditated." Mr. Bennet was completely satisfied. Mr. Collins was precisely the kind of absurdity he had anticipated. He listened with great enjoyment, maintaining a gravely composed face, and sought no sympathy beyond exchanging a glance with Elizabeth from time to time. When tea time came, and Mr. Bennet had found his amusement sufficient, he cheerfully led the guest back to the drawing-room. After tea, he invited Mr. Collins to read aloud to the young ladies. Mr. Collins accepted readily, and a book was handed to him. But upon taking it up, he apologized, saying he never read novels. Kitty stared at him, and Lydia cried out in astonishment. Several other books were produced. After some deliberation, he chose Fordyce's Sermons. Lydia opened her mouth wide in disbelief as he prepared to read, but before he had delivered more than a solemn sentence, she interrupted. "Mamma, do you know? Uncle Phillips means to dismiss Richard, and if he does, the colonel will take him, and told me so. I shall go to Meriden tomorrow to learn more, and to find out when Denny comes back from town." Her elder sisters begged her to be silent, but Mr. Collins, feeling deeply offended, put the book aside and began. "I have frequently observed how little young ladies are inclined to read books of serious instruction, though they are written expressly for their benefit. I must confess I am quite astonished, for such works are exceedingly necessary. But I would not wish to trouble you further." He turned to Mr. Bennet and suggested they play backgammon. Mr. Bennet agreed, thinking his cousin had chosen wisely in freeing the young ladies from further edification. Mrs. Bennet and the older girls apologized politely for Lydia's interruption, but Mr. Collins assured them he bore no resentment toward her behavior and could never be offended by anything she might do. Then he sat down with Mr. Bennet at the table to begin the game. Chapter 15. Mr. Collins was a man of little sensibility, and neither education nor social interaction had done anything to remedy the deficiency. Most of his early life had been spent under the guidance of an illiterate and miserly father. Though he had attended university, he had studied only enough to get by and had formed no useful connections. The submissiveness that his father had imposed on him had at first given him a humble appearance, but it was now counterbalanced by the self-importance of a narrow mind, a secluded life, and an inflated sense of his own early and unexpected success. A fortunate opportunity had recommended him to Lady Catherine de Bourgh when a clerical position became vacant. His reverence for her rank, the devotion he bore toward her as his patroness, combined with his high opinion of himself, the dignity of his office, and the privileges of a rector altogether produced in him a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, of self-importance and servility. Now, with a comfortable parsonage and a sufficient income, he intended to marry. His plan, when he sought reconciliation with the Longbourn family, was to choose one of the young ladies as his wife, provided they were indeed as pretty and amiable as he had heard. This was his idea of making amends, his way of atoning for the fact that he would inherit Mr. Bennet's estate. He considered it an excellent plan, believing himself fully qualified and perfectly suitable, and, of course, acting with great generosity and disinterestedness on his part. After meeting the young ladies, his plan did not change. Jane's beautiful face confirmed the general report, and met even his strictest notions regarding his future status. On the first morning, Jane was his choice. However, by the next morning, an adjustment had taken place. While sitting with Mrs. Bennet at breakfast, the conversation began with the parsonage and naturally led to a confession of his hopes that at Longbourn he might find someone fit to preside over his home. Amid gracious smiles and encouraging words, hints were dropped concerning Jane, to whom he was apparently inclined. But Mrs. Bennet was obliged to mention that Jane might soon be engaged. Mr. Collins immediately shifted his attention from Jane to Elizabeth, and he did so rather quickly, while Mrs. Bennet was still busy suggesting that Elizabeth was nearly equal to Jane in age and beauty. Mrs. Bennet took this hint to heart and fully believed that shortly both her daughters would be engaged. The man she could not bear the thought of merely 2 days earlier was now treated as an honored guest. Lydia did not forget her intention of going to Meryton. Her sisters, except Mary, agreed to accompany her, and Mr. Collins joined them to look after them at Mr. Bennet's request. Mr. Bennet wanted nothing more than to send the man away so that he might read in peace, for after breakfast Mr. Collins had followed him everywhere, pretending to examine the large books in the library while incessantly talking about his house and garden in Hunsford. This behavior greatly annoyed Mr. Bennet. In his library, he was always guaranteed tranquility. As he had once told Elizabeth, though he had to endure folly and vanity elsewhere, in his library he was usually free from such disturbances. Therefore, he politely suggested that Mr. Collins escort his daughters. Mr. Collins himself preferred walking with the young ladies to reading, and seemed delighted to close the weighty book and accompany them. With small displays of formality and elaborate compliments, he walked with them toward Meryton. The girls no longer paid him any attention. Their eyes wandered along the street searching for the officers, and only a particularly stylish hat or fine muslin could distract them. But a young man appeared who immediately caught their attention. He had a remarkably handsome appearance, walking in the opposite direction with an officer. The officer was Denny, newly returned from London, the same man Lydia had spoken about. He bowed as they passed. All the girls were impressed by the stranger's appearance and wondered who he could be. Kitty and Lydia decided to find out. They crossed the street under the pretense of buying something from the shop opposite and happened to reach the pavement just as the 2 young men turned back toward the same place. Denny greeted them and asked permission to introduce his friend, Mr. Wickham, who had returned from town with him and had joined the same regiment. The uniform alone made the young man instantly attractive. Everything about him was pleasing: his refined features, his excellent figure, and his lively, engaging manner. The introduction was followed at once by cheerful, fluent, and perfectly proper conversation. While they were speaking, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention, and they saw Darcy and Bingley riding toward them. On seeing the group, the 2 gentlemen approached, offering the usual polite remarks. Everything about him was pleasing: his refined features, his excellent figure, and his lively, engaging manner. The introduction was followed at once by cheerful, fluent, and perfectly proper conversation. While they were speaking, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention, and they saw Darcy and Bingley riding toward them. On seeing the group, the 2 gentlemen approached, offering the usual polite remarks. Bingley was the main speaker, Jane the principal listener. He explained that they were on their way to Longbourn to inquire after her health. Darcy confirmed his friend's statement with a slight bow, and just as he was determined not to look at Elizabeth, his eyes fell upon the stranger. Elizabeth had just enough time to notice the expressions on both men's faces, shocked by the effect of the encounter. One turned pale, the other red. After a few moments, Wickham touched his hat in greeting, and Darcy barely acknowledged him. What was the meaning of this? No explanation was imaginable, yet it was impossible not to wonder. Meanwhile, Bingley, seemingly unaware of the incident, took his leave and rode off with Darcy. Denny and Wickham escorted the girls to Mrs. Phillips's house, then bowed and departed, despite Lydia's attempts to persuade them to come inside. Mrs. Phillips was delighted to see her nieces, and the two oldest were welcomed with particular warmth after their absence. She was surprised by their sudden return home. Since they had not used the carriage, she would not have known had she not heard it from Mr. Jones's man. Jane introduced Mr. Collins, and he was received with great courtesy. Mrs. Phillips was delighted to see her nieces, and the two oldest were welcomed with particular warmth after their absence. She was surprised by their sudden return home. Since they had not used the carriage, she would not have known had she not heard it from Mr. Jones's man. Jane introduced Mr. Collins, and he was received with great courtesy. He responded with pompous politeness, apologizing for presenting himself without prior acquaintance and solely through the introduction of the young ladies. Mrs. Phillips seemed uneasy at receiving someone so excessively formal. But her welcome was interrupted by the girls' questions about the new young man. Of him, she knew no more than they did, but she promised that her husband would call on him and invite him to dinner if the Bennets would also come the following evening. Everyone agreed, and they left in high spirits, anticipating pleasant entertainment ahead. Mr. Collins repeated his apologies, but Mrs. Phillips assured him they were quite unnecessary. On the way home, Elizabeth told Jane about Darcy's strange behavior. Though Jane could excuse anyone if there was even a possibility of innocence, even she could not explain what had happened. Mr. Collins made Mrs. Bennet extremely pleased by praising Mrs. Phillips's manners. He declared that, excluding Lady Catherine and her daughter, he had never met a more elegant woman, for she had not only welcomed him with the highest politeness but had even invited him to dine though they had not met before. He supposed the invitation was due to his connection with the Bennet family, yet he was delighted. Never in his life had he been shown so much attention. Chapter 16. Since no one objected to the girls gathering at their aunt's house, and everyone disapproved of Mr. Collins's hesitation about leaving Mr. and Mrs. Bennet during his visit, the carriage took him and his 5 cousins to Meryton. When they entered the sitting room, the girls were delighted to learn that Mr. Wickham had accepted their uncle's invitation and was currently in the house. After everyone was seated, Mr. Collins looked around the room in a daze of admiration. He was so impressed by the size and furnishings that he remarked he felt as though he were sitting in the summer dining parlor at Rosings. At first, the comparison brought no pleasure. But once Mrs. Phillips understood what kind of place Rosings was and who owned it after hearing him describe one of Lady Catherine's drawing rooms and learning that just the chimney-piece had cost £800, she immediately felt the full force of the compliment. She would not have been displeased even if he had compared it to the housekeeper's room. Until the gentlemen arrived to join them, Mr. Collins continued describing all the splendor of Lady Catherine and her estate, occasionally digressing to praise his own humble parsonage and its improvements. He soon noticed that Mrs. Phillips listened most attentively, and the more she heard, the higher her impression of his importance rose. She fully intended to repeat everything to her neighbors as soon as possible. For the girls, deprived of anything interesting to listen to and tired of waiting, the time passed painfully slowly. At last, the gentleman arrived. When Mr. Wickham entered, Elizabeth felt as if she had either never seen him before or had not thought of him at all since, for she suddenly felt a wave of unexplainable admiration. The officers were all well-favored and elegant, and the handsomest among them were present. But Wickham surpassed them all in appearance, face, manner, and bearing, just as they surpassed Mr. Phillips, whose broad face and strong scent of port wine accompanied him into the room. Mr. Wickham was fortunate to attract the attention of nearly all the ladies, and Elizabeth was fortunate to have a seat near him. His easy manner of conversation, though the subject was nothing more engaging than the rain and the likelihood of more rain, convinced her that even the dullest and most ordinary topic could become interesting in the hands of someone who spoke so well. Compared to Wickham and the other officers, Mr. Collins seemed to sink into insignificance. To the young ladies he was nothing. Yet Miss Phillips still listened politely, and under her supervision he became the most frequently invited guest for coffee and pastries. When the card tables were set out, Mr. Collins gladly accepted Mrs. Phillips's invitation to join the whist table. "I do not know much about the game," he said, but I am delighted to have the opportunity to learn, for it suits my present situation in life." Mrs. Phillips thanked him, though she did not wait to hear his explanation. Mr. Wickham did not play whist, but he was very happy to sit between Elizabeth and Lydia at the other table. Lydia threatened to monopolize him with her chatter, but her enthusiasm for lottery tickets soon consumed all her attention, leaving Mr. Wickham free to converse quietly with Elizabeth. She listened eagerly, though what she most wanted to hear the true reason for the tension between him and Mr. Darcy he did not mention, and she dared not bring up Darcy's name herself. However, her curiosity was soon satisfied, for Wickham himself introduced the subject. He asked how far Netherfield was from Meryton, and after hearing the answer, he hesitated before asking how long Darcy had been staying there. Elizabeth replied, "About a month." Then, unwilling for the subject to end, she added, "I understand that he has a considerable estate in Derbyshire." Wickham answered, "Yes, his estate is quite extensive, worth 10,000 a year. And I dare say no one can give you more information about him than I can, for I have been connected with his family in a very particular manner since my childhood." Elizabeth could not hide her astonishment. "You may be surprised," Wickham continued, "especially after seeing how coldly we treated each other yesterday. Are you well acquainted with Mr. Darcy?" "As much as I ever wished to be," Elizabeth said sharply. "I stayed for days under the same roof with him, and from that I am convinced he is a most disagreeable man." Wickham replied, "I have no right to give my opinion of whether he is agreeable or not. I know him too well to be impartial. I cannot be fair, yet your opinion surprises me. Perhaps in any house but this one, you would not speak so plainly." "I assure you," Elizabeth said, "I would say the same anywhere in the neighborhood except at Netherfield. Nobody in Hertfordshire likes him. You will find no one who speaks well of him." Wickham said, "I do not pretend to regret that he or anyone should not be valued above their true worth. But I believe this is not often the case with him. People are dazzled by his fortune and status, or intimidated by his proud and imposing manners, and judge him as he wishes to be judged." "Even if I scarcely knew him," said Elizabeth, "I would still think him ill-tempered." Wickham only shook his head. "I wonder how long he intends to stay here." "I've heard nothing of his plans," Elizabeth said. "I hope his presence will not interfere with your joining the regiment here." "Oh, no," he replied. "Darcy will not drive me away. If he wishes to avoid me, he must leave. We are not friends, and I confess his presence is painful to me, but I have no reason to avoid him except for what I could justly declare to the world, a deep sense of ill-usage and sorrow that I should ever have to think so poorly of him. His father, now deceased, was one of the best men that ever lived, my greatest benefactor, and I cannot be near Darcy without feeling a pang of grief for the memory of that excellent man. Darcy has behaved shamefully to me, but I would forgive him anything rather than believe he has betrayed the hopes and trust of his father." Elizabeth listened with increasing interest, though propriety kept her from asking too many questions. Wickham shifted the conversation to more general topics: Meryton, the surrounding countryside, and local society. He praised everything he had seen, and when speaking of social circles, he added, "It was partly for the sake of good society, a pleasant circle of acquaintance, that I joined the militia. I know it was a respectable. It was chiefly for the social advantages that I joined the militia. My friend Denny encouraged me greatly. I longed for society. I have suffered disappointment, and loneliness is not suited to my temper. The army was not my first choice, but circumstances gave me the qualification. The church should have been my profession. I was raised for it. My life would have been secure and valuable if the man I just mentioned." "Indeed," Elizabeth cried. "Yes. Mr. Darcy's father intended the best living on his estate for me. He was my godfather and deeply attached to me. I could never repay his kindness. But when the income was reduced, I received nothing." "How dreadful!" Elizabeth exclaimed. "How could the will be ignored? Why did you not seek legal action?" "There was an ambiguous clause," Wickham replied. "A man of honor would not have questioned his father's intention, but Darcy did. He claimed it was conditional and insisted I had forfeited every right through careless extravagance. The fact remains, 2 years before I came of age, the living was given to another man. I cannot accuse myself of having done anything to deserve it. My temper is warm. I may have spoken with too much frankness, but nothing worse. The truth is simply that we are very different men, and he hates me." "How awful!" Elizabeth cried. "He should be exposed." "He will be," Wickham said quietly, "but not by me. As long as I remember his father with gratitude, I cannot publicly accuse the son." Elizabeth admired his generosity and thought he looked handsomer than ever. After some silence she exclaimed, "What could have been his motive? What could make him so cruel?" "Jealousy," Wickham replied. "If Mr. Darcy's father had cared less for me, his son might have treated me better. But the unusual affection between us irritated Darcy from the beginning." Elizabeth listened with increasing indignation. Every line of Wickham's story seemed to confirm her worst impressions of Darcy. She even recalled Darcy boasting at Netherfield of being resentful and unforgiving. The conversation shifted often, but Elizabeth always returned to the main subject. They spoke of Miss Darcy, of her beauty, accomplishments, and pride. Wickham hinted that she and Darcy might someday unite her fortune with his. This amused Elizabeth, who remembered Miss Bingley's admiration of Darcy and the futility of her attentions if he were destined for another. The whist table broke up, and Mr. Collins took a seat between Elizabeth and Mrs. Phillips. He lost every round, reassuring Mrs. Phillips with pompous dignity that money mattered little to him, thanks to Lady Catherine. His words caught Wickham's attention, and after observing Collins, he quietly asked Elizabeth about his connection to the de Bourgh family. She explained that Lady Catherine had recently given Collins a living, and Wickham then informed her that Lady Catherine and Mrs. Darcy had been sisters, making her Darcy's aunt. Dinner ended the card games and brought the evening to a noisy close. Everyone liked Wickham, everything he said was sensible, and everything he did seemed graceful. Elizabeth returned home thinking only of him and his story. Lydia chattered nonstop about lottery tickets and winnings. Mr. Collins talked of Mr. and Mrs. Phillips's courtesy, his indifference to losing at whist, and the excellent dishes served. Elizabeth could not mention Wickham's name even once, though he occupied all her thoughts. Chapter 17. Elizabeth repeated to Jane everything she had learned from Mr. Wickham, and Jane listened with astonishment and concern. She did not know what to believe, whether Mr. Darcy truly did not deserve the regard Mr. Bingley had for him. Yet her gentle nature would not allow her to doubt the sincerity of someone as pleasant as Mr. Wickham. The idea that he had suffered such cruel treatment touched her deeply. Therefore, she felt there was nothing to do but think well of both men, defend the character of each, and suppose that some unfortunate misunderstanding or accident, something inexplicable by any other means, had caused the situation. She said, "You may say that both of them have been misled in one way or another. How, we do not know. Perhaps one has misunderstood the other. In short, we cannot guess the reasons or circumstances that drove them apart, so we cannot blame either of them." "That is very true. And now, my dear Jane, what can you say on behalf of those who might be concerned in this matter?" "We must assume both are blameless, or else we must think ill of someone. You may laugh as much as you please, Lizzie, but you cannot laugh me out of my opinion. Only consider how disgraceful it would be for Mr. Darcy if he had truly behaved so badly towards someone his father had favored and promised to provide for. It cannot be. No person with ordinary humanity, no one with any sense of character, could act so. Could his closest friend have been deceived so completely? Impossible. I can more easily believe that Mr. Bingley has been deceived than that Mr. Wickham fabricated the whole story he told me last night. The names, the circumstances, everything was given so naturally. If it is not true, then let Mr. Darcy contradict it. Besides, Mr. Darcy's manner suggests something of the truth. It is all so difficult, so distressing. One does not know what to think. Forgive me, but one does know exactly what to think." But Jane could be certain of only one thing, that Mr. Bingley, if he had indeed been misled, would suffer greatly when the truth became known. The two sisters were then called into the house, for they had visitors, the very people they had just been discussing. Mr. Bingley and his sisters had come to deliver invitations to a ball at Netherfield the following Tuesday. Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst were delighted to see their dear friend Jane again, insisting it had been far too long and asking repeatedly what she had been doing since they last met. They paid little attention to the rest of the family, avoided Mrs. Bennet whenever possible, spoke little to Elizabeth, and did not speak at all to the other girls. Everyone in the Bennet household was excited about the ball. Mrs. Bennet considered it an event arranged especially for her eldest daughter, and was particularly proud that Mr. Bingley had delivered the invitation personally rather than sending a formal card. Jane imagined a happy evening with her two friends and the attentions of her cousin. Elizabeth looked forward to many dances with Mr. Wickham and to seeing her opinions confirmed by Mr. Darcy's behavior. Catherine and Lydia cared far less about who would be present, for although they liked dancing with Mr. Wickham, they were not bound to him alone, and a ball was a ball. Even Mary reassured the family that she would not attend reluctantly. She said, "As long as I have my mornings to myself, that is enough. I may occasionally join an evening's amusement without feeling compelled. Society demands some participation from everyone, and I believe all people desire some measure of recreation now and then." Elizabeth was in such high spirits that, despite generally disliking conversation with Mr. Collins, she could not resist asking whether he intended to accept Mr. Bingley's invitation and whether he believed it proper for him to attend. She was rather surprised to hear him declare that he had no objections at all. He did not fear censure from either the Archbishop or Lady Catherine de Bourgh for taking the liberty of dancing. He said, "I do not consider a ball of this kind, arranged by a gentleman of good standing for respectable company, to have any inherently improper tendencies. I would not refuse to dance, for it would give me the honor of taking by the hand my fair cousins. And I shall take this opportunity to request the honor of your hand, my dear cousin Elizabeth, for the first two dances, an honor which, I believe, your elder sister Jane will understand has been claimed for good reason, and not from any disrespect toward her." Elizabeth was completely dismayed. She had been looking forward to dancing the first two dances with Mr. Wickham, and now she was to dance them with Mr. Collins instead. Never had her lively disposition been so poorly rewarded, but there was no help for it. Her enjoyment and Mr. Wickham's must be delayed for a while. She accepted Mr. Collins's invitation as graciously as she could. She disliked his flattering manner even more now that she suspected what it implied. It struck her suddenly that among all her sisters, she had been chosen to preside over the parsonage at Hunsford and fill a seat at the card table at Rosings whenever no guest of higher rank was available. The idea gradually became a certainty as she noticed him growing more polite toward her and heard him praising her intelligence and liveliness. Though she felt more surprise than pleasure, she soon saw that her mother believed a proposal might be near and was delighted at the prospect. But Elizabeth refused to recognize her mother's hints, knowing that any response would lead to a heated argument. Mr. Collins might never propose, and there was no sense in quarreling about him now. If not for the upcoming Netherfield ball to prepare for and discuss, the Bennet sisters would have been miserable, for the continuous rain kept them from going to Meryton. They could not visit their aunt, could not see the officers, could hear no new gossip, and had to make do with thinking about Netherfield. Even Elizabeth found her patience tested, for her growing acquaintance with Mr. Wickham was completely interrupted. As for Kitty and Lydia, if not for the ball on Tuesday, nothing could have relieved the tedium of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Chapter 18. Elizabeth never suspected that Wickham would be absent from the ball until she entered the drawing-room at Netherfield and searched in vain among the men in red coats. She had been so certain he would be there that she had not bothered to recall whether anything might have warned her otherwise. She had dressed with more care than usual, preparing with the eager hope of conquering what was not yet won in his heart, thinking it was something that might be achieved in one evening. But a dreadful thought suddenly struck her. He might have been deliberately left off Bingley's guest list to satisfy Darcy. Although this was not quite true, Denny confirmed his absence when Lydia spoke to him. Denny said that Wickham had had urgent business in town the day before and had not yet returned. With a meaningful smile, he added, "I cannot imagine any business that would call him away at such a time, unless he wished to avoid meeting someone here." Lydia did not notice, but Elizabeth heard clearly. Though the news reassured her that Darcy had not interfered, as she had first assumed, her disappointment deepened her resentment toward him so severely that afterwards she could hardly answer his polite questions with even minimal civility. She thought that showing Darcy any interest, tolerance, or patience would harm Wickham. She resolved to say nothing more to Darcy and turned away with more irritation than she could fully suppress even when speaking with Bingley, whose blind partiality only provoked her further. But Elizabeth's temperament did not allow her irritation to last. Although all her hopes for the evening had been dashed, her spirits gradually recovered. After sharing her frustrations with Charlotte Lucas, whom she had not seen for a week, she soon shifted to laughing over the peculiarities of her cousin. telling Charlotte all about him. Still, the first 2 dances brought fresh misery. They were pure torture. Mr. Collins, awkward and distressed, apologized instead of attending to her, frequently mistimed his steps without realizing it, and caused her every embarrassment and discomfort a partner could. She was relieved to leave him. She danced next with an officer and was glad to hear him speak of Wickham and to learn how well liked he was. When the dance ended, she returned to Charlotte Lucas. While they were talking, Darcy suddenly approached her. She was surprised when he asked her to dance. Without thinking, she accepted. He walked away at once, leaving her irritated at her own lack of judgment. Charlotte tried to comfort her. "I dare say you will find him very agreeable." Good heavens, that would be the greatest misfortune of all. To find amiable the very man whom one is determined to hate. Do not wish such evil upon me. Nevertheless, when the music began and Darcy returned for her, Charlotte whispered that she should not be foolish enough to let thoughts of Wickham make her appear disagreeable in the eyes of a man 10 times his station. Elizabeth did not reply. She took Darcy's hand and was surprised at her own composure in facing him. She could see equal surprise in the eyes of the other dancers observing them. For a while, neither spoke. She began to imagine that their silence might last through both dances. At first she had no intention of breaking it, until she suddenly thought that the best revenge would be to force him to start speaking. So she made a few trivial remarks about the ball. He replied and then fell silent again. After a moment she tried again. "Mr. Darcy, it is your turn to say something. I have said everything about the ball. Now you must remark on the size of the room or the number of dancers." He smiled and assured her he would say whatever she wished. "Very well, that reply will do for now. Eventually, I may declare that home balls are more pleasant than public ones. But for now, let us be silent. Do you talk by rule, then, when you are dancing? Sometimes, one must speak a little, you know. It would look odd to be silent for half an hour together. No, with some people, one must arrange the conversation so that they have as little trouble speaking as possible. Are you trying to make out your own feelings in the case, or are you imagining mine?" Elizabeth answered playfully. "Both, for I find we are alike in refusing to speak unless we expect to surprise the whole room and have our words remembered forever as a brilliant remark. That is not at all like your character, I am sure. As for mine, I dare not say you think that a faithful portrait. I will not decide upon my own character." He made no reply. They fell silent again until near the end of the dance, when he asked whether she and her sisters often visited Meryton. She said yes, and unable to resist added, "When we met you the other day, we had just been introduced to a new acquaintance." His reaction was immediate. A deep expression of pride spread across his face, but he said nothing. Elizabeth reproached herself for weakness yet could not continue the subject. At last Darcy spoke, with effort. "Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure popularity, but whether he has the ability to maintain it is less certain." Elizabeth replied, "He has been unfortunate to lose your friendship." Then, with emphasis, "and in a way that may affect him for life." Darcy said nothing, eager to change the subject. Just then Sir William Lucas approached but, upon seeing Darcy, paused to offer a long speech praising his dancing and his partner. He hinted broadly at the happy event he expected soon, casting his eyes toward Jane and Bingley. Darcy, though missing the latter part, seemed struck by the suggestion. He looked gravely toward Bingley and Jane, now dancing. But he quickly recovered and turned back to Elizabeth. "Sir William's interruption has made me forget what we were speaking of." "I do not think we were speaking at all. Sir William could not have interrupted to people with nothing to say. We have tried 2 or 3 subjects without success. I cannot imagine what we might talk of next." He smiled. "Books, perhaps, books. No, I am sure we never read the same sort of books, or at least not with the same feelings. It is a pity you think so, but if that is the case, we shall have much to compare." "No, I cannot talk of books in a ballroom. My head is full of other things." He asked skeptically, "The present always occupies you in such scenes?" "Yes, always." She answered inattentively, her mind wandering, until another thought occurred. "Mr. Darcy, I remember you once said you rarely forgive, and that an offense once given is never forgotten. I suppose you are very cautious about giving offense." "I hope so." "And you avoid prejudices that might blind your judgment." "I hope so." Those who never change their opinions must be certain of getting them right in the beginning. May I ask what you are aiming at? Only attempting to sketch your character. I want to understand it. And what have you discovered? I cannot make it out. I hear such contradictory things that I am bewildered. I can readily believe, he said seriously, that people say very different things of me. Miss Bennet, I would ask you not to draw my character yet. There is reason to fear the result may be neither fair nor favorable. But if I do not attempt it now, I may never have another opportunity. I would not wish to prevent you, he said coldly. She said no more. They danced the next dance in silence and parted with mutual displeasure, though his was perhaps deeper, for he already felt too strongly about her to forgive easily, and his anger turned toward someone else. Shortly afterward Caroline Bingley approached with a disdainful air. "Oh, Miss Eliza, I hear you are quite taken with George Wickham. Your sister asked me 1,000 questions about him. I suppose he forgot to mention he is the son of old Mr. Wickham, the late Mr. Darcy's steward. As a friend, I advise you not to trust him. Darcy has always been very kind to him, though Wickham has treated Darcy shamefully. I do not know all the particulars, but I know Darcy is entirely blameless and hates to hear his name. Though my brother could not avoid inviting him, he was delighted Wickham chose not to appear. Living here is impertinent enough. How he dared, I cannot imagine. I pity you, Miss Eliza, for discovering the truth about someone you admire, but considering his decline, one cannot expect better," Elizabeth replied sharply. "According to you, his worth and his decline seem to consist of nothing worse than being the steward's son, which he told me himself." "I am sorry to have interfered. I meant well," Miss Bingley said with a sneer before walking off. Elizabeth muttered, "Impertinent girl. If she thinks I will be influenced by such spite and ignorance, she is mistaken. I see nothing in this but deliberate malice from her and Darcy." She soon found Jane, who greeted her with such radiant happiness that Elizabeth instantly understood her sister's mood. Jane smiled sweetly and said, "I have nothing pleasant to tell you about Mr. Wickham. Bingley doesn't know much of his past and hardly anything about the incident with Darcy, but he can fully vouch for Darcy's integrity and honor. He believes Wickham is not someone Darcy ought to concern himself with. I am sorry, but Bingley and his sisters think Wickham is not a respectable man. They believe Darcy's dislike is justified." "Has Bingley known Wickham long?" "No, he only met him this morning in Meryton." "Then all he knows comes from Darcy. I am perfectly satisfied. And what of the church living?" "He remembers nothing of it, though he has heard Darcy mention it once or twice." "But he believes the gift was conditional?" Elizabeth answered warmly. "I do not doubt Bingley's sincerity, but I cannot regard his testimony as convincing. He knows only Darcy's side. I still think of Wickham and Darcy just as I did." She quickly turned the subject to Jane's hopes regarding Bingley, encouraging her with all her heart. When Bingley approached, Elizabeth withdrew and soon was intercepted by Mr. Collins, who excitedly announced an important discovery. "I have learned that a near relation of my patroness is in the room. I overheard him mention Miss de Bourgh and Lady Catherine." "How wonderful! I must introduce myself at once. I am sure he will forgive my delay. I shall reassure him that her ladyship is quite well." "You do not intend to introduce yourself to Mr. Darcy?" "I do indeed. I shall beg his pardon for not doing so sooner. Surely he will appreciate my attention." Elizabeth tried desperately to stop him, explaining Darcy would see such an approach as improper, but he insisted that his clerical dignity made the introduction not only appropriate but necessary. He bowed and went to Darcy. Elizabeth watched anxiously. Darcy appeared astonished at being addressed. Mr. Collins delivered a speech. Elizabeth could almost hear the words Hunsford and Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Darcy responded with visible constraint and increasing disdain before Mr. Collins finally withdrew, beaming with satisfaction. "I am quite pleased," he said. He spoke very politely and even praised Lady Catherine's discernment in choosing her clergyman. Elizabeth, having nothing else to distract her, turned her thoughts to Jane and Bingley, feeling almost as happy as Jane at the sight of their mutual affection. She imagined Jane mistress of Netherfield and thought she could even like the Bingley sisters under those circumstances. But when they sat for supper, she found the misfortune of being placed near her mother. Mrs. Bennet spoke freely to Lady Lucas of her expectations regarding Jane and Bingley, enumerating the advantages of the match with endless satisfaction. Elizabeth tried desperately to stop her, mortified because Darcy sat opposite them and could hear nearly everything. Mrs. Bennet dismissed her objections. "Darcy is nothing to me, I need not care what he thinks." Elizabeth blushed continually, certain Darcy listened despite barely glancing their way. His expression shifted from contemptuous anger to stern composure. At last Mrs. Bennet finished. Lady Lucas, bored and hungry, returned to her dinner. Elizabeth began to recover until music was requested and Mary prepared to perform. Her weak voice and affected manner made Elizabeth suffer intensely. Despite Elizabeth's pleading glances, Mary sang not one but two songs before Mr. Bennet firmly stopped her. Elizabeth pitied both Mary and her father, but knew nothing could be done. Other guests were invited to entertain the room. Mr. Collins then launched into a pompous speech on how music suited a clergyman so long as it did not distract from his many duties, including honoring those who advanced him. Bowing to Darcy as he finished, he looked exceedingly pleased with himself. Chapter 19. A new scene unfolded at Longbourn the next day. Mr. Collins had finally decided to make his formal proposal. Having resolved not to waste any time since his leave would end on Saturday and lacking even the slightest apprehension that might have restrained him, he began with great orderliness, following all the proprieties of the occasion. After breakfast, in the presence of Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth, and one of her younger sisters, he addressed Mrs. Bennet. "Madam, in consideration of your affectionate concern for your beautiful daughter Elizabeth, may I request the honor of speaking to her privately this morning?" Before Elizabeth could react with anything more than a blush, Mrs. Bennet eagerly replied, "Oh yes, certainly. I'm sure Lizzie will be very happy. I'm sure she won't refuse. Come, Kitty, I want you upstairs." As Mrs. Bennet hurried away, Elizabeth cried out, "Mother, please don't go, I beg you not to go. Mr. Collins, forgive me, but you have nothing to say to me that others should not hear. I am going away. No, no, don't be silly, Lizzie. I want you to stay right where you are." And seeing Elizabeth's distressed and uneasy expression as she seemed on the verge of escaping, she added, "Lizzie, I insist that you stay and listen to Mr. Collins." Elizabeth could not resist such direct orders. A moment's reflection persuaded her that the wisest course was to settle the matter as quickly and quietly as possible. She sat down, trying to conceal the mixture of distress and distraction she felt. Mrs. Bennet and Kitty withdrew, and Mr. Collins began. "My dear Miss Elizabeth, pray believe that your modesty has in no way harmed your charm. On the contrary, it enhances your many perfections. In my eyes, you would be less agreeable if you did not display such becoming embarrassment. But let me assure you that your respected mother has granted me permission to address you thus. Surely you cannot be unaware of my intentions, though your delicate sensibility may lead you to pretend otherwise. My feelings have been too evident to be mistaken. From the moment I entered this house, I singled you out as the companion of my future life. But before I allow my passion to carry me away from the proper order of a proposal, it may be best to explain the reasons that brought me to Hertfordshire with the intention of choosing a wife, for indeed, that was my purpose." His solemn declaration that his emotions might lead him astray from the topic nearly made Elizabeth laugh, and prevented her from interrupting during the brief pause that followed. He continued, "My reasons for marriage are as follows. First, I believe every clergyman with a comfortable income such as my own should set an example of matrimony within his parish. Second, I am convinced that married life will offer me great happiness. And third, though I ought to have mentioned this first, this is the advice of that noble lady whom I have the honor to call my patroness. Twice she condescended to recommend the measure without my asking, and only last Saturday, before I left Hunsford, she said, 'Mr. Collins, you must marry. A clergyman like you must marry. Choose wisely, choose a good woman, for my sake and for your own. She must be active and useful, not necessarily distinguished, but capable of managing a household. That is my advice. Find such a woman as soon as possible. Bring her to Hunsford, and I shall visit her. Allow me, my dear cousin, to add that Lady Catherine's concern and guidance are among the many advantages I possess. You will find her manners even more imposing than I have described. Your lively wit will please her highly, especially when tempered by the silence and respect her rank must always inspire. Now, As for my choosing Longbourn rather than the area in which I reside, though there are many charming young ladies there, I shall be the inheritor of this estate upon the unfortunate but distant event of your honored father's passing, though I sincerely hope he will live for many years. Out of consideration for the family, I felt it only proper to select one of his daughters as my wife, so that they may suffer as little as possible when that melancholy circumstance occurs. Such are my motives, and I trust they will not lessen your regard for me. And now, I have nothing further to add except to assure you, in the strongest language, of my violent affection. I am entirely indifferent to fortune, and shall make no financial demands on your father, knowing he cannot provide. You will receive only £1,000 after your mother's death. As such, I shall remain utterly silent on the matter. You may rest assured that once we are married, I shall never reproach you on this account." It became absolutely necessary to stop him now. Elizabeth exclaimed, "Sir, you are too hasty. You forget that I have not yet made any reply. Let me do so at once. I am grateful for your compliments, truly grateful for your proposal, but I cannot accept it." Mr. Collins responded with a grand, dismissive gesture. "I am well aware that young ladies, when first addressed, often refuse the gentleman, even when they truly intend to accept him later. Indeed, they may refuse him 2 or 3 times. Thus I am far from discouraged by what you have said. I entertain high hopes of soon calling you my wife." Elizabeth exclaimed, "Sir, your hope is most extraordinary after what I have just said. Believe me, I am not one of those young ladies, if such exist, who would risk their happiness by refusing the man they mean to accept on the chance of being asked again. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced that I am not the woman to make you happy. No, if Lady Catherine knew me, she would see I do not meet any of her requirements," Mr. Collins answered solemnly. "If Lady Catherine does hold such an opinion, I cannot imagine she would utterly reject you. And trust me, when I next have the honor of seeing her, I shall describe your modesty, your household abilities, and your other agreeable qualities in the most glowing terms." "Mr. Collins," Elizabeth replied, "your praise is unnecessary. You must allow me to judge myself. You show me greater respect by believing what I say. I wish you happiness and prosperity. In refusing you, I have done all I can to prevent the opposite. Now that you have discharged your sense of duty toward my family in making the proposal, you may inherit Longbourn whenever circumstances allow, without any self-reproach. Let us consider the matter ended." She rose, intending to leave, but he continued, "When I have the privilege of addressing you again on this subject, I trust I shall receive a more favorable answer. I do not blame you for your present refusal. I know ladies often refuse the first time, merely out of delicacy." Elizabeth cried, speaking with more firmness, "Mr. Collins, you make it impossible for me. If what I have said so far has given you encouragement, then I know not how to express my refusal so that you will believe me. I am entirely earnest. My dear cousin, you must permit me to interpret your refusal as nothing more than the customary form," he continued, confidently, "for I cannot suppose myself in any way unworthy of your acceptance. My situation, my connection with the de Bourgh family, and my future relationship with your own family are all highly favorable. And you must consider that, despite your attractions, it is not certain you will receive another offer. Your portion is unfortunately small, and your beauty and accomplishments may not always make up for that deficiency. Thus I conclude you cannot be serious, and that you merely wish me to express my feelings with greater ardor, as elegant ladies often do." Elizabeth answered, "Sir, I assure you I have no intention of causing distress. On the contrary, I wish to be perfectly sincere. I thank you again for the honor of your proposal, but I cannot accept it. My feelings forbid the match, absolutely forbid it. What more can I say? Do not consider me a fashionable lady trying to torment you, but a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart." Mr. Collins replied, in clumsy gallantry, "You are charming indeed. I am convinced that once your honored parents approve, your acceptance will follow." Elizabeth gave him no chance to continue his deliberate self-deception. She immediately left the room. She had already resolved that if he persisted in interpreting her refusals as encouragement and appealed to her father's answer would be decisive and certainly not mistaken for the emotional whims or affected delicacy of a refined young lady. Chapter 20. Mr. Collins was not left long to the silent contemplation of his successful love. For Mrs. Bennet, having dawdled about in the vestibule to watch for the end of the conference, no sooner saw Elizabeth open the door and with quick step pass her towards the staircase than she entered the breakfast-room, and congratulated both him and herself in warm terms on the happy prospect of their nearer connection. Mr. Collins received and returned these felicitations with equal pleasure, and then proceeded to relate the particulars of their interview, with the result of which he trusted he had every reason to be satisfied, since the refusal which his cousin had steadfastly given him would naturally flow from her bashful modesty and the genuine delicacy of her character. This information, however, startled Mrs. Bennet. She would have been glad to be equally satisfied that her daughter had meant to encourage him by protesting against his proposals, and that she persisted in refusing him solely to increase his love. But she dared not believe it, and could not help saying so. "But, depend upon it, Mr. Collins," she added, "that Lizzie shall be brought to reason. I will speak to her about it directly. She is a very headstrong, foolish girl, and does not know her own interest. But I will make her know it." "Pardon me for interrupting you, madam," cried Mr. Collins. "But if she is really headstrong and foolish, I know not whether she would altogether be a very desirable wife to a man in my situation, who naturally looks for happiness in the marriage state. If therefore she actually persists in rejecting my suit, perhaps it were better not to force her into accepting me, because if liable to such defects of temper, she could not contribute much to my felicity." "Sir, you quite misunderstand me," said Mrs. Bennet, alarmed. "Lizzie is only headstrong in such matters as these. In everything else she is as good-natured a girl as ever lived. I will go directly to Mr. Bennet, and we shall very soon settle it with her, I am sure." She would not give him time to reply, but hurrying instantly to her husband, called out as she entered the library, "Oh, Mr. Bennet, you are wanted immediately. We are all in an uproar. You must come and make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him, and if you do not make haste he will change his mind and not have her." Mr. Bennet raised his eyes from his book as she entered, and fixed them on her face with a calm unconcern, which was not in the least altered by her communication. "I have not the pleasure of understanding you," said he, when she had finished her speech. "Of what are you talking?" "Of Mr. Collins and Lizzie. Lizzie declares she will not have Mr. Collins, and Mr. Collins begins to say he will not have Lizzie. And what am I to do on the occasion? It seems a hopeless business." "Speak to Lizzie about it yourself. Tell her that you insist upon her marrying him. Let her come in, she shall hear my opinion." Mrs. Bennet rang the bell, and Miss Elizabeth was summoned to the library. "Come here, child," cried her father as she appeared. "I have sent for you on an affair of importance. I understand that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage. Is it true?" Elizabeth replied that it was. "Very well, and this offer of marriage you have refused?" "I have, sir." "Very well. We now come to the point. Your mother insists upon your accepting it. Is it not so, Mrs. Bennet?" "Yes, or I will never see her again." "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." Elizabeth could not but smile at such a conclusion of such a beginning. But Mrs. Bennet, who had persuaded herself that her husband regarded the affair as she wished, was excessively disappointed. "What do you mean, Mr. Bennet, in talking this way? You promised me to insist upon her marrying him." "My dear," replied her husband, "I have two small favors to request. First, that you will allow me the free use of my understanding on the present occasion, and secondly of my room. I shall be glad to have the library to myself as soon as may be." Not yet, however, in spite of her disappointment in her husband, did Mrs. Bennet give up the point. She talked to Elizabeth again and again, coaxed and threatened her by turns. She endeavored to secure Jane in her interest. But Jane, with all possible mildness, declined interfering, and Elizabeth, sometimes with real earnestness and sometimes with playful gaiety, replied to her attacks. Though her manner varied, however, she never had the least inclination to change her determination. Mr. Collins meanwhile was meditating in solitude on what had passed. He thought too well of himself to comprehend on what motives his cousin could refuse him, and though it was very natural that the refusal should seem in the first instance to be her own, he was nevertheless too proud to be much hurt by it. A little more than a fancy, however, of being slighted had given him no great pain, and his resentment of such behavior was so little mixed with any necessity of having her, that it added nothing to his disappointment. When the family were assembled in the breakfast room, Charlotte Lucas came to spend the morning with them. She was met in the vestibule by Lydia, who, flying to her, cried in a whisper, "I am glad you are come, for there is such fun here. What do you think has happened this morning? Mr. Collins has made an offer to Lizzie, and she will not have him." Charlotte had hardly time to answer before they were joined by Kitty, who came to tell the same news. And no sooner had they entered the breakfast room, where Mrs. Bennet was alone, than she likewise began on the subject, calling on Miss Lucas for her compassion, and entreating her to persuade her friend Lizzie to comply with the wishes of all her family. "My dear Miss Lucas," she added, in a melancholy tone, "do but help me to persuade Lizzie to marry Mr. Collins, for nobody is on my side, nobody takes part with me, I am cruelly used, nobody feels for my poor nerves." Charlotte's reply was spared by the entrance of Jane and Elizabeth. There she comes," continued Mrs. Bennet, looking as unconcerned as may be, and caring no more for us than if we were at York, provided she can have her own way. "But I tell you, Miss Lizzie, if you take it into your head to go on refusing every offer of marriage in this way, you will never get a husband, and I am sure I do not know who is to maintain you when your father is dead. I shall not be able to keep you, and so I warn you, I have done with you from this very day. I told you in the library, you know, that I should never speak to you again, and I have not forgot it. I have no pleasure in talking to undutiful children, not that I have any pleasure in talking to anybody. People who suffer as I do from nervous complaints can have no great inclination for talking. Nobody can tell what I suffer, but it is always so. Those who do not complain are never pitied." Her daughters listened in silence to this effusion, sensible that any attempt to reason with her or soothe her would only increase the irritation. She talked on, therefore, without interruption from any of them, till they were joined by Mr. Collins, who entered the room with an air more stately than usual. As soon as he was in the room, Mrs. Bennet began, "Well, my dear Mr. Collins, I am so glad you have come. Now, my girls, I desire you will hold your tongues, and let Mr. Collins and me have a little conversation together." Elizabeth passed quietly out of the room, Jane and Kitty followed, but Lydia stood her ground, determined to hear all she could. And Charlotte, detained first by the civility of Mr. Collins, who seemed very much struck by her appearance, and secondly by a momentary curiosity, satisfied herself in walking to the window and pretending not to hear. In a doleful voice, Mrs. Bennet thus began the projected conversation. "Oh, Mr. Collins, my dear madam," replied he, "let us be forever silent on this point. Far be it from me," he presently continued, in a voice that marked his displeasure, "to resent the behavior of your daughter. Resignation to inevitable evils is the duty of us all, the peculiar duty of a young man who has been so fortunate as I have been in early preferment, and I trust I am resigned. Perhaps not the less so from feeling a doubt of my positive happiness had she accepted me, for I have often observed that resignation to inevitable evils is the duty of us all. But I hope you will not think me wanting in respect for your family, my dear madam, because I consider it as a point of honor and self-respect to be unhurt by a refusal from a woman of mean rank and desperate prospects. You must not expect me to lament her own loss excessively.